So you want to create a Git repository. Well, I assure you, you've come to the right place. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief of theserverside.com, and I'm going to show you very quickly how to create a Git repository on your local machine, assuming that you've got Git installed. Now, if you stick around, I'll also show you how to create a Git repository on GitHub if you're using GitHub, and I'll even show you an even easier way to create a Git repository locally using a tool that comes with Git called Git GUI. Now, first of all, in order to create a Git repository, you need Git installed. And I'm just going to assume you've already got that done. Okay, if you know you've got Git installed, in order to create a Git repository, it's super easy. All you have to do is first find a folder on your file system where you want your Git repository to go. I got a folder called repos right here, and I'm going to create a brand new subfolder in here. I'm just going to call it my project. I'm going to open up this project. This is where my Git repository is going to go. This is where my code is going to go, right? When you're using Git, you're tracking your code. So this is where all the files from my project would go. But I need the Git repository first. So in order to create the Git repository, just right-click on the open white space in that folder and select Open Git Bash here. Git Bash gets installed with Git. If you don't see that, especially if you're on Windows, well, Git isn't installed and you need to do that. You also notice Open Git GUI here. That's a great tool that makes working with Git a lot easier. I'm going to show you that to you a little bit later. So I'm going to select Open Git Bash here, and my Git Bash shell appears. And I'm just going to issue one command. It's just going to be git init, which is a lot better than getting out of it. Now, as I issue this command, git init, keep your eye on the prize on the right-hand side. Watch this. Boom, you'll see that .git folder. That's Git, that's the Git repository. Now, that is a hidden folder, so if you don't have your operating system set to show hidden files, you're not going to see it. But if you are showing hidden files, you'll see that. And that's where all of the information about Git, about your Git repository gets stored. You can open that up. But I'm telling you right now, you probably shouldn't be going in here because that's all sort of the plumbing for Git. We want to stick to the porcelain. But yeah, that's sort of all of the inner workings of your Git repository right there. Now, of course, what is a Git repository? Well, a Git repository is the place that tracks all of your code for a project. So if I've got a project and I want to create a new text file here or a new HTML file and say alpha dot, let's create a HTML file just to be cool. I've got an HTML file in that folder right there. Well, maybe I want to track that. Maybe I want to keep a history of that. And so Git allows you to do that. In order to track that, I just have to say git add that to the list of files that you're tracking. So there we go, git add alpha.html. That doesn't create a commit, but that does tell Git to include this file in the next commit that I do. So I'm saying to Git, hey, here's a file in the file system. I'd like you to track it, make it part of the next commit. Now, after you've added some files to the Git index, that's what that's called, the Git index that you add the file to, you eventually do a commit. And so I can do something like, say, git commit -m. That just says I want to have a message associated with this commit. And I'll say, hey, this is my first commit. Simple message. And then you click enter, and then all of a sudden you've got a commit on your Git repository. Now there's a little trick here. This is actually going to fail. Watch this. It's going to say, hey, you haven't told me who you are, and you haven't given me your email address yet. And if you're going to be using Git, well, every time you do a commit, it likes to track who the person was and keep track of their email. You know, so if somebody's looking through the code and they see that you did something brilliant, well, they can send you an email and say, you are brilliant. Also, if you screw up, they can fire you. But I need to issue these two commands. So I just have to say git config -- global user.email and put an email address, so me at mcnz.com, and then say git config -- global user.name, and my name's Cameron McKenzie. And now Control L clears the screen. If I go back with the up button and say git commit first commit, boom, it now says, hey, you've just made a commit and Git is going to track that. And if I did a command like git reflog, that just says, give me a log, give me an output of all the different commits that I've done locally, you'll see that, well, it now lists that there's one commit in the history, right? There it is, that first commit. And of course, then you just keep doing this, right? So I'm just going to create a new text document here, call it beta.txt in this case. Maybe I'll create a new file and call it charlie.txt. I can now come over here and say git add. Git add dot means git add everything to the Git index. I can even say git status to find out what files have been changed, what files have been updated, and what files are staged in the index, added to the index to be made part of the next commit. Here it says there's two new files, beta and Charlie. And then I can go git commit -m, second commit. And now those files are made part of my Git history and specifically part of that second commit. So if I do a git reflog again and ask for a history of commits, you'll see I've got a history here where there was the first commit that had alpha.html in it, and then there's a second commit that has both beta and charlie.html in it. And there you go. That's the fundamentals of creating a Git repository on your local machine using Git init. Now, a lot of people will actually be using GitHub. And so I've actually got one of my GitHub accounts up here, Learn Git Fast. You might be wondering, how do you create a Git repository on GitHub? Well, it's a little bit different. You come over here to repository, so log into your GitHub account if you've got a GitHub account. I mean, obviously you need a GitHub account if you want to create a repository on GitHub. There's a beautiful green button here when I click on repositories for new. And you just give it a name, my other project. I'm going to make this a public repository. I'm going to add a README file to it. You can add git ignore files. So if, say you're doing Java coding, that'll make sure that certain files that are created during compilation won't be included in commits. You can choose a license. I'll do the MIT license. I mean, do whatever you want here. It just creates the basic repository. And then boom, all of a sudden now I've got a repository up on GitHub. And in fact, you can actually go up here and use the GUI tool to create new files. I'll create a new file and I don't know, what will I call this? I'll call this devo.html. We had alpha, beta, and Charlie already. Are we not gender neutral people? We don't want to assume any genders here. Let's commit that change. Do the commit. And so there you go. That is now creating a commit up on GitHub. We created a repository on GitHub, added a few files when we created it, even added a commit to that file. Now, if you're going to be working with Git, you want the code to come down to your local machine. And so anytime you go to a public repository, you'll see this green button that says code. Just copy the URL that's there and then come down to your local machine again. I'm going to go into that repos folder. You don't put Git repositories inside Git repositories. They should all be in separate projects. I'm just going to come down here to repos and say, hey, Git Bash here. And now, in order to get the repository that was created up on GitHub down to my local machine, I do a git clone. Git clone. I'm going to paste that in, see if that works. There you go. That's the URL that points to that repository. My GitHub account is Learn Git Fast. The name of the repository was my other project. So it's git clone, my other project. And keep an eye over here. I'll click enter. And boom, you actually see the folder for my other project getting created. There it is right there. And you know, if I really wanted to, I could create a new file right here. We'll call it echo.txt. And then we just do this whole dance again, right? Git add dot, which adds the file to the repository. Now, I'm actually in the repos folder here over in my Git Bash shell, and I should be in my other projects. So made a mistake there. CD, my other project. Okay, now I'm in that project folder. And now I can do that git commit, right? Do the git add first. add those files to the index. I can say git status to see that echo's been added. And then git commit -m. And I don't know, is that my third commit, fourth commit, first commit? I'll call it the echo commit. And now if I do a git ref log here, well, it's going to say that there's a couple of commits in my history. One of the commits was the commit that happened on the server. I cloned that repository, and now I did another commit, my echo commit right here. So there you go. That's a couple of ways to create repositories in Git. Git init, if you're just doing Git locally. You can create a repository in GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket very easily by using the GUI tools if you have accounts. And you can bring it down to your local machine by doing a Git clone. And you know what? There's another tool that you can use called Git GUI. I'm actually just going to, I'll close this window here and I'll right click here and say open Git GUI here. The Git GUI will open up. You notice right here, it's a nice little GUI tool. It says you want to create a new repository. I'm like, yeah, I'll create a new repository. We'll say, what folder do you want to be in? Well, I'll create a new folder here. Call it repos galore. Right? So there we go. We've got the folder selected there. I'm going to click create using this GUI tool. And you'll notice that if I end up going into this repos galore folder, again, you'll see that .git folder there, which is the embodiment of the Git repo. And you notice that each of these different projects has its own .git folder because each one is a separate repository. For every project that you have, you create a separate Git repository on your file system to represent it. Okay, well, and as I said, so here's the Git GUI tool. It's super cool. Like I could come over here and create a new text document and I'll call it alpha.txt. Alpha.txt gets created here. Of course, it's not staged. So let's see if we can do a refresh over here. Rescan. There's alpha. Can we click and drag that? Looks like we can't quite click and drag it. Can stage the changed file. So now that adds it to the index. And now after adding it to the index, I can commit it. Another commit. And there we go. State changed, another commit. And then we just do commit. There we go. It's been a while since I used the Git GUI tool. But a great little tool for helping you learn Git and do all the basic functions without having to know the terminal window. So it's super cool. So get used to that as well. And there you go. That's how easy it is to create a Git repository using Git init, using the Git GUI tool, and even cloning a Git repository from GitHub. Now, I have to tell you, I got some other great tutorials on Git and GitHub and Git and Bitbucket and full tutorials that go from end to end. And if you watch those tutorials and even work through them with me, I guarantee it, you'll be very, very dangerous when it comes to using this Git tool. You'll know everything from knowing how to create repositories, do commits, add things to the index, and do logging, but you'll be a master of push and pull and clone and branch and squash and rebase, you name it. So please check out those tutorials. I'll have some links in the description and also have some cards here that you can click on. If you're interested in my personal antics, please go over to Twitter @CameronMCNZ. Give me a follow. You can always subscribe to my newsletter. Again, link in the description. And you know what? Why don't you subscribe on YouTube?